Okay, welcome everyone to our Green Sabbath gathering for February. And we are really delighted, honored to have Leah Penniman here with us, farmer, author, activist, a voodoo queen mother, a Jewish person, a little of almost everything, or maybe everything. And we'll talk about many things, particularly Farming While Black, which is the title of Leah's most recent book. And I'll type that into the chat in a few seconds, but really thank you all for coming. Those who are familiar to me and each other and those who aren't, and feel free to write into the chat who you are, introduce yourself. And Leah, feel free to say more about yourself if you like. So thank you for joining us from Eastern New York State. And really, I'll give you the proverbial floor. I guess today it'll be a dirt floor. And we'll have plenty of time later on to talk, ask questions, and have a conversation. So Leah, please.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to see everyone, and I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about Black Earth Wisdom, which builds on Farming While Black. As mentioned, my name is Leah Penniman. I use all pronouns. I'm one of the founding co-directors and also the farm director at Soulfire Farm in Mohican Territory, also known as Grafton, New York. And I'm a mother, I'm a Jewish person, I'm a member of clergy in 2 West African indigenous religions, and I am a deep lover of the earth and of nature. And so I'm very excited to talk to you about some of the psycho-spiritual and cosmological underpinnings of our work at Soulfire Farm, which are explained in Black Earth Wisdom. So to begin, I want to share that way back in 1887, Dr. George Washington Carver said, "I love to think of nature as unlimited broadcasting stations through which God speaks to us every day, every hour." Dr. Carver, as many know, was a pioneer in regenerative agriculture as one of the first scientists in the US to advocate for the use of things like leguminous cover crops, nutrient-rich mulching, diversified horticulture. And he awoke in the pre-dawn hours and went to the forest to talk to plants each day and believed that this was where he received the instructions for his work. Dr. Carver explained, "How do I talk to a little flower? Through it, I talk to the infinite. And what is the infinite? It is the silent, small force, the still, small voice." The practice of earth listening is part of the cultural heritage of Black people. We always begin our storytelling at Soulfire by paying homage to our ancestors. So in addition to Dr. Carver, who are some of these other earth listening elders? We can shout out, of course, Dr. Wangari Maathai, founder of the Greenbelt movement, who planted over 51 million trees as part of a women's political movement, or earning the Nobel Peace Prize. We can uplift, of course, Harriet Tubman, herbalist, orchardist, ecologist, and freedom fighter, who liberated 70 enslaved people and cured Union soldiers using her deft knowledge of plant medicine. We can also uplift John Edmondson, lover of birds, who taught taxidermy and ornithology to Charles Darwin. Dr. Charles Henry Turner, zoologist, the first scientist to demonstrate that insects are intelligent beings. Hattie Carthen, tree planter and catalyst for the Brooklyn Community Gardens. Hazel Johnson, the mother of environmental justice. And I want to invite you at this moment to call into the space an ancestor who revered the earth in your own lineage. So you can write in the chat the name of an ancestor from your lineage who cared for and revered and listened to the earth. And if you can't think of one, you can pull one off of this incredible incomplete list of Black Earth listening elders and add that to the chat as well. Ashe, amen. So as you know, one of the great challenges of our time is that humanity by and large has forgotten how to listen to the earth. We're no longer literate in the languages of the earth and no longer understand the kinship bonds we have in nature. What do I mean by this? Well, one of the people I interviewed for the book, Audrey Peterman, a Jamaican elder and lover of wild spaces, put it well when she explained that there was once a time when most people knew how to read the night sky. We could tell directionality, seasons, weather, story, and calendar by reading the stars and the clouds. In other words, the sky was a primary source. But society today has come to rely on secondary and tertiary sources farther and farther away from the sky to get our information, which leads to a dangerous and distorted game of telephone, leading to scrambled messages. There was a time when our ancestors knew to plant corn when the oak leaves were the size of the squirrel's ears, because the soil was finally warm enough. And the languages of the earth are many. It's ice cores, the pH of the ocean, the bird song, gravity, tree rings, animal tracks. If I were to tell you that I lived in a neighborhood my whole life and didn't learn the names of the people next door, you might have some judgments on my character. And yet here we are in a neighborhood of trees and insects and amphibians, and many of us cannot call them by name. What we do not know, we cannot love. As a young adult, I spent months studying agriculture in Ghana, West Africa, which is one of my maternal ancestral homelands. And my mentors were these incredible women, the Queen Mothers of Krobo, guardians of history, culture, and land. And they asked me one day, you know, Leah, is it true that in the US, most farmers will put a seed in the ground and they won't dance or pray or sing or pour libations or even say thank you to the seed, and then they expect it to grow and feed them? And when I ashamedly admitted to this, they said, no wonder you're all sick. You think the earth is a thing and not a living being. Non-kin thinking is what leads to both racialized oppression and earth ravaging. It is the severing of family and the relegating of others to non-person that makes possible the enactment of violence and oppression on the other. Embedded in the theory of supremacy of white people over other races is the theory of human supremacy over nature. This non-kin thinking is a uniquely Western invention and is possibly best described in 1846 by Senator Thomas Hart Benton, who asserted, and I quote, "It seems that the white race alone received the divine command to subdue and replenish the earth, for it is the only race that has obeyed it, the only race that hunts out new and distant lands and even a new world to subdue and replenish." And there are consequences to this, right? The consequences of non-kin thinking and earth illiteracy are utter devastation and deep trouble. Species are in trouble, right? We're currently experiencing the Holocene mass extinction, the most rapid loss of biodiversity in the history of the planet, with 1 million species threatened with extinction in the coming decades. Scientists monitor around 20,000 populations of mammals and fish and birds and amphibians worldwide, and they've seen a 68% decline in just 25 years. According to one of my interviewees, Dr. Drew Lanham, there are 3 billion fewer birds singing now than when my grandmother was born. Our seeds are in trouble. We've lost 75% of the world's crop varieties in the past 100 years, and the proprietary seed market accounts for 82% of the global seed supply, with, as you'd imagine, Monsanto and DuPont owning the largest shares. Oceans are in trouble. 1 in 4 humans rely on oceans for our livelihood, and yet more than 90% of global fish stocks are fully exploited or overfished. And the runoff from our farms and our lawns and manufacturing has led to over 400 dead zones worldwide. These are places where oxygen levels are so low that the fish suffocate. Microplastics in our seas now outnumber the stars in our galaxy 500-fold. The climate is in trouble, right? Soil tillage, deforestation, the burning of fossil fuels have increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and raised Earth's temperature. It's unequivocal. The glaciers are in retreat, the oceans are acidifying, and extreme weather events like heat waves, floods, droughts, hurricanes, and tornadoes are increasing in intensity and frequency. And the Earth's people are in trouble too. And that trouble is not fairly shared. African-American communities continue to be disproportionately burdened with environmental harm. So things like air pollution, flooding, heat exposure, living near chemical facilities, power plants, leaded pipes, and trash incinerators. By way of example, the predominantly African-American residents of Louisiana's Cancer Alley are exposed to emissions from 150 oil refineries, chemical facilities, and plastics plants, and have disproportionately high rates of cancer. And folks like Rashid Lockhart, who is a formerly incarcerated firefighter, are among the thousands of inmates who comprise around a third of California's wildland firefighting crews. And this is because the 13th Amendment, which was supposed to outlaw slavery, has an exclusionary clause that permits slavery as punishment for a crime. So Rashid and fellow inmates are working on the front lines of wildfires, in other words, the front lines of climate change, and compensated about 50 cents an hour for their labor. People are also in trouble, not just because of the environmental burdens they're exposed to, but the environmental benefits that they are prevented from attaining. We know that green spaces heal, right? Study after study shows that if a hospitalized patient sees nature, they get better faster. When people walk in the woods, they solve problems. There was a nationwide study of 900,000 people that showed that children who grew up with the lowest access to green space had a 55% higher risk of developing a psychiatric disorder, even after you correct for income. And yet 74% of communities of color in the US are living in nature-deprived areas compared to about 20% of white communities. And this is mirrored in what's happening in the farming community, which is my home and my area of expertise. I'm sure you've heard me talk about this before, but still is worth mentioning that, you know, Black households once owned around 16 million acres of land, which represented 14% of the nation's farms. And a combination of USDA discrimination, lynching, and land grabbing led to nearly complete land loss. So today, 98% of agricultural land is white owned. So these disparities in terms of who's burdened with harm and who enjoys environmental benefits should not really come as a surprise, because the US environmental movement was really rooted in white supremacy from the beginning. We could take the US national parks as an example. There's 84 million acres of parkland, and all of this was stolen from Native communities through forced treaty agreements and the genocidal project of Manifest Destiny. A lot of the purveyors of the idea of national parks were avowed eugenicists. So Madison Grant, who created the Everglades, Olympic, Glacier, and Denali National Parks, did so as a way to strengthen the, quote, Nordic race. Adolf Hitler referred to Grant's 1916 book, The Passage of a Great Race, as his Bible and inspiration for his heinous crimes against humanity. The first head of the US Forest Service, Gifford Pinchot, was on the advisory council of the American Eugenics Society. John Muir, who founded the Sierra Club in 1982, referred to Black and Indigenous people as dirty, lazy, and uncivilized. And the beloved James Audubon, the famed ornithologist and namesake of the Audubon Society, enslaved people and stole Black people's human remains for pseudoscientific studies claiming white superiority. So even when the National Park Service was founded in 1916, Jim Crow laws and local customs kept Black and brown people on the outside. And even today, despite the fact that 70% of Black and brown people enjoy nature recreational activities offered in national parks, less than 2% of those visitors are African American. And, you know, just to drive it home, I was so shocked when I learned this. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King, were planning a vacation to the national parks in New Brunswick in 1960. And they needed a break. You know, they worked really hard. And just to make sure, their acquaintance sent a letter ahead to make sure they would be welcomed as African Americans. And the innkeeper at the Fundy National Park in New Brunswick said, we feel it would be better not to accommodate your Negro friends.
Horror.
Right. So of course, you know, in the face of big trouble, our people have always risen and resisted, right? When the Olin Corporation dumped 4,000 tons of DDT into the waters of Triana, Alabama, Black residents sued and they forced remediation and compensation. Community members resisted the Whispering Pines landfill in Houston, Texas, and the Warren County hazardous waste landfill in North Carolina on the basis of environmental racism. And throughout the 80s and early 90s, this environmental justice movement picked up steam And there was the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991 that wrote the 17 founding principles of environmental justice, including the sacredness of Mother Earth, the uplifting of Native treaty rights, and the opposition to discriminatory public policy. Black farmers resisted. They literally rode their tractors onto the mall in Washington, D.C., demanding justice for their lost land and farms and suing the federal government for discrimination in the famous Pigford case, and now organizing nationally for reparations. And despite, prejudice to the contrary, the reality is that people of color are significantly more concerned about climate change than white people are. 49% of white people are concerned compared to 57% of Black people and 69% of Latine folks. And way back in 1990, when 85% of the public did not even register the notion of global warming, Black journalist Steve Curwood proposed a radio program on the climate. His producers laughed at him. They said, give it a shot. You're going to run out of stories in 6 months. And Living on Earth is on air to this day. So like Mr. Curwood, right, there are so many who persist in believing that the land and water are family members and who act accordingly. Many who are reviving the ancestral and ancient practice of listening to the earth to know which way to go. So Black Earth wisdom has been a journey of learning from those whose skin is the color of soil as they share lessons from the earth. I spent the past few years talking with about 40 notable Black ecological thinkers, including folks like Alice Walker and James Edward Mills, Pandora Thomas, Dr. Lorette Savoy, Dr. Claudia Ford, and others. And our time together caused such copious tears of reverent joy to fall all over my keyboard as I typed their words that I had to replace my technology. Their lessons were myriad and complex, but I want to distill with you 9 central motifs that came out of these interviews and answer the question, what do we learn when we listen to the earth? So the first thing we learn is that all beings are sacred, right? In Yoruba cosmology, natural forces such as rivers, trees, birds, and hills are deities to be worshipped. There are at least 73 species of trees that are deified. And according to Awishi Agbaye Wande Abimbola, there are forest areas in Nigeria called Igbo Etile, where no hunting is permitted, and Elujo Boboforo, where only spiritual and magical activities are allowed. Islam also honors these concepts of Tawhid, the oneness of God and creation, Ayat, the seeing of signs of God everywhere, Khalifa, being a steward of the earth, and Mizan, living in balance with nature. So according to interviewee Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, the entire earth is a mosque. There is a unity of spirit and matter and a sacredness imbued in all things. He said, nature and humans are in constant prayer. So if you destroy a forest or a grassland, you are silencing the voices of prayer. The second lesson, there is a covenant of moderation between species. Okay. So all life on Earth shares this tiny, narrow band of habitability that extends from the deepest roots of trees and the dark environment of ocean trenches up to the highest mountaintops. And this layer, called the biosphere, is only about 12 miles from top to bottom, comprising just 0.3% of the planet's radius. And we're tasked to share this tiny life raft with all beings. So I'll share a Yoruba story about this. In the Yoruba sacred literature, there's an Odu named Ogbeodi that offers a verse about the consequences of using excessive force and greed in our relationships with other creatures. So as the story goes, Mr. Byforce used deception to invite his friends, grasshopper, hen, wolf, dog, hyena, viper, etc., to a collective work gathering. And each one agreed to come to his party, but on the condition that their predatory enemy would not be present. For example, hen had a habit of gobbling up all of grasshopper's children. And so grasshopper wanted reassurance that hen wouldn't be present. And hen wanted assurance that wolf, who tried to devour all of her chicks, would also not be invited. But Mr. Byforce was sly and cunning. And so not only did he lie about his guest list, but he actually arranged all the guests right next to their sworn enemy. And then he withheld food and drink and worked them hard all day. So they became famished and desperate. And when they couldn't stand it anymore, they just pounced on each other and started gnashing and biting and consuming. And As it goes, dewdrops, which represent the calming force of wisdom in the universe, fell upon all of them and cooled them down and reminded them of a covenant that was instituted at the beginning of creation. And this is the covenant of moderation that says that you can take what you need, but not one drop more. You can take what you need, but not one more. And so they hugged and shook hands and restored this covenant of moderation. So according to Awishe, this beginning era of time was called Oba Jomi Jomi, the era of water, the king who eats water. And it's when all of creation was in siblinghood. And then we moved to another era of creation, which is the Oba Jegi Jegi, the era of the eating of wood. And this is about becoming settled and populous and the beginning of war and manufacture and urbanism. And we're now in an era called Oba Jeon, which is the era of consumption, which is connected to processed food and greed and exploitation. The final era that we're headed towards, we hope, is Oba Ero, the age of the antidote, the age of healing. So the third lesson is that nature is cooperative and generous, right? I'm a biology major, so this is important because we're trained around understanding that competition is the main driving force in nature. But in fact, mutualistic interactions are vital for terrestrial ecosystem function. And about 80% of land plants rely on mycorrhizal relationships with fungi to provide them with the inorganic compounds they need. The estimate of tropical rainforest plants with seed dispersal mutualisms with animals are about 80%. And major evolutionary events like the invention of the evolution of the eukaryotic cell via symbiogenesis or the colonization of land plants in collaboration with mycorrhizal fungi could not have happened without cooperation. And, creatures help each other out. Vampire bats regurgitate their own blood to prevent other bats from starving, even if they're not in their family. Ground squirrels and prairie dogs cry out to warn others of predators, and birds migrate in a V formation, taking turns, benefiting from one another's upwash as they fly. Whether we talk about lichens or nitrogen fixing or insect pollination, the reality is that cooperation is so pervasive that scientists are now arguing that the very concept of the individual organism needs rethinking, and that multicellular organisms and their symbiotic microbes may need to be regarded as cohesive units acted on by natural selection. The fourth lesson, nature is queer and trans. At least 90% of flowering plants have hermaphroditic bisexual flowers that contain both male and female reproductive parts. Same-sex intimacy, including partnership, pair bonding, affectionate touch, co-parenting, have been documented in over 450 species of animals worldwide. Among birds, we see queer love in black swans, albatrosses, mallards, pigeons, and others. Mammals that exhibit gay intimacy include dolphins, bisons, bats, elephants, giraffes, polecats, gorillas, sheep, and others. Even lizards, tortoises, dragonflies, fruit flies, and bed bugs have same-sex relationships. Fifth lesson, nature doesn't hate anybody. Frederick Douglass, in his 1873 speech, said, "The grand old earth has no prejudice against race, color, or previous condition of servitude, but flings open her ample breast to all who come to her for succor or relief." This is true, right? In the face of racialized brutality, health crisis, or collective pain, like Black people continue to go and lay down our burdens by the riverside. And nature has this endless capacity to compost our trauma into hope and receives each one of us as her child. Chris Bolden Newsom, interviewee for Black Earth Wisdom, says that he hears the earth say to him each day, "I love you and you are mine." Drew Lanham testified, "The land did not hate, only people did. The earth never judged or spat. Not a single cardinal or ovenbird has ever paused in dawn song declaration to ask the reason for my being." 6, we still have a couple languages in common with the earth, and these are song and silence. Most of us still speak these languages, and we learn to sing from the earth. For example, from birds, they use many of the same rhythmic variations, intervals, and combination of notes that humans do. They follow our scales, they sing in canon, and they even transpose their motifs into different keys. We learned an octave interval from the ruby-crowned kinglet. We learned the chromatic scale from the canyon wren and the pentatonic scale from the hermit thrush. And the California marsh wren taught us call and response, employing a repertoire of over 126 themes. The Hutu and Tutsi people of Central East Africa learned their songs from the elephants, and the indigenous people of the Vanuatu Islands learned their songs and dances from mimicking the Mount Yasur volcano. Song and silence. According to interviewee Toy Scott, the Mbuti people of Congo deeply value silence. They see the forest as always talking, and the quiet pauses between the sounds are called ekimi, which are the sources of peace, whereas the noise, including human noise, is called akami and is the source of conflict. So only in silence can the wisdom of the ancestors come through, and silence is considered a form of spirit speech. I think that John Francis Planetwalker intuited this wisdom in silence after witnessing, he's a Black activist, after witnessing the devastation caused by the 1971 oil spill off the coast of San Francisco. John Francis Planetwalker gave up motorized transport and fossil fuels, and for 22 years walked everywhere he went. 17 of those years were in a vow of silence, where he only communicated using his drawings and his banjo. He later went on to author some of the most important oil spill management legislation in this country. So in Gloryland, Shelton Johnson wrote, "Wilderness is just a word, and the wind got no use for anything that come out of our mouth except songs or prayers. Only then are we speaking from our heart and worth listening to. Otherwise, just be quiet and let the sky do the talking." The seventh lesson from the earth is that land is the basis of freedom. Malcolm X said, "Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality." And, you know, land is about much more than growing food or building a house. It's even about much more than intergenerational wealth transfer. It's a source of cultural continuity, ancestral belonging, self-determination, and the stability of home. According to interviewee Savvy Horn, there were emancipated freedmen who returned to the plantation because they found they could not live without a particular grove of trees. The Black community of Falls Church, Virginia, wrote to the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865 saying, "We feel that it's essential that we obtain homes and the ground beneath them, so that we may raise fruit trees concerning which our children can say these are ours." So nearly all the Black land has slipped away, right? Through government discrimination, white supremacist violence, erasure of the legacy of non-owning caretakers, and more recently, the disappearance of land under the rising coastal waters of climate change. And the only real wealth is in the land. You know, it's the 5 gardens of Dr. Drew Lanham's childhood and the home provisioning skills of Dr. Lenny Sorensen, the collard varieties saved by Mama Ira Wallace, and the Moruga Hill rice seed carried forward by Aaliyah Frazier. A litany of scientific studies have shown that African traditional diets have huge health benefits, rich in leafy greens and roots and tubers and fermented whole grains, all the goodness that we can pull from the soil. Land is health, land is life. And Margaret Walker, an incredible African-American poet, said, "My grandmothers were strong. They followed plows and bent to toil. They moved through fields sowing seed. They touched the earth and grain grew. They were full of sturdiness and singing. My grandmothers were strong." The 8th lesson is that we're all struggling to breathe, right? While majestic rainforests often get all the credit for providing the oxygen in our atmosphere, the reality is that oceans are more aptly titled the lungs of the earth. Ocean creatures, mostly phytoplankton really, produce over half of the oxygen that we inhale. And phytoplankton are struggling to breathe. They're declining at a rate of 1% per year due to warming waters and polluted waters. But of course, they're not the only ones gasping for air, right? Black and brown people disproportionately choked by COVID and wildfires washed away by hurricanes. You know, according to climatologist Kendra Pierre-Louis, we as a society are getting accustomed and going numb to mass death. There's a way that the first few hundred deaths raise an alarm, but the millionth doesn't even make the news. Eric Garner cried out 11 times, "I can't breathe." And who was listening, right? Black poet Ross Gay wrote, "A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for Parks and Rec's horticultural department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, some of them, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe." And the final lesson I'll share with you today is that we are kin. You know, we are taught that our dignity comes from setting ourselves apart from earthly beings, better than, separate from animals and plants. But Dr. Joshua Bennett sees it differently. He said, Black lives are those that are often positioned as outside the human-animal divide altogether and placed elsewhere in a zone of non-being, where the kinds of extravagant violence so often deployed against and solely reserved for animals is made allowable, deemed necessary in order for white society to function at peak performance. But in a counterintuitive move, he says, the animals are my kin, though, my truest kin, since we all belong to the earth. The lie of whiteness is that we can separate ourselves from the earth. In considering animals as co-laborers, friends, and partners in the plantation fields, Black people resisted a social order predicated on confinement and open to a more radical sociology grounded in a desire for a world without cages or chains. It follows that prison and police abolition has environmentalist roots, viewing human life as a part of all life on earth. Brilliant, brilliant. So if this is to be true, then the degradation of the earth is a manifestation of self-hatred. But what if we could see ourselves the way the divine body of the earth sees us, right? What if we learn to love and emulate our elder siblings, the hawk, the black bear, the wolves, in a practice of sacred biomimicry? You know, what I take away from this journey of Black Earth wisdom is that we need to rehydrate 3 habits of mind: earth as text, earth as kin, and earth as teacher. And this practice is both modern and ancestral, right? Just like the scientific method is used time and again for novel experiments, these core methodologies of earth listening provide a framework for innovation. So Afro-Indigenes is not stuck in the past. It's a modern and continually evolving practice. And we all have a role to play, right? We can deepen our own earth listening practices, starting with the names of our beyond human king, moving on to the tree rings and the weather patterns and the soil structure and the bird song. We can give away resources and power to Black and Indigenous-led ecological projects. So orgs like Girl Trek, Outdoor Afro, Taproot Earth, Urban Ocean Lab, National Black Food and Justice Alliance, et cetera. And on a systems front, we can support land back for Native people, take a stand for reparations, and advocate for the rights of nature. And of course, this is like a lifelong learning journey. We're just dipping our toes in. So it's important to read and to listen and to deepen. So I have a whole directory of Black Indigenous eco-literature and organizations, but I recommend starting with Unbowed by Wangari Maathai, As Long as the Grass Grows, and All We Can Save. Because in this time, right, as we're acutely aware of the fractures in our system of runaway consumption and corporate insatiability and the need for Sabbath, we know that there's no going back to normal, and that the path forward demands we take our rightful place as the younger siblings in creation, deferring to the oceans, the forests, the mountains as our teachers. And I thank you all for listening to this presentation. You're the first ones to hear it. And let's talk.
Wow, beautiful.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
That was
First ones to
incredible.
hear it. Wow, what an honor. Seems like you've practiced a lot. Okay, any thoughts, questions?
Yeah, questions,
responses?
thoughts, reflections. Let's have a conversation.
Kara, go ahead.
Yeah. Leah, tremendous. Thank you so much. Massive range of emotions hearing you. So intimate and extraordinarily relevant in so many capacities. So just tremendous gratitude for you and for what you've just shared. I have three questions. One is on Harriet Tubman and EMFs. One is on Benin voodoo and Sephardic folklore. And one is on petroleum parenting, what I call petroleum parenting. I'm going to try and be brief with all of these. So
let's do them one at a time.
Do them one at a time. Yeah. I'm doing articles on social permaculture and dreams. So with Harriet Tubman, I'm curious if there is research or if you're familiar at all with her relationship with EMFs, and I'm curious as objects in the context of the sacred, and her sensitivity, perhaps because of her original injury, or one of the injuries that we know of, made her more sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and how that may have helped her, sensitize her, and how that how you may feel that relates to 5G and the infiltration of EMF poisoning. And again, looking at objects as sacred, and every object having its own electromagnetic field, and how we can position that in a spiritual intelligence context. So that's the first question. Should I ask you all of them, and then you can choose which one you want?
I think with the EMFs, you should just share your opinion. So Harriet Tubman talks about her her guidance as coming directly through her relationship with God. And so she would enter these trance states and get downloads from the divine, and that would guide her knowing which way to go. She was also an astute herbalist, had a deep knowledge of the plants of the forest, and used that to be able to keep people safe. So, you know, I'll uplift her narrative through her own words, but I welcome you to say your thoughts about EMFs and 5G.
Well, I'm curious, since she did have the head injury that we know of, if that may have actually opened up a certain level of consciousness to what already exists, like in a quantum field, where her sensitivity was heightened to these fields of energy, the fields of interconnectivity that objects do, or what we call objects do, inhabit. So that's something that I've been playing with and sense as a strong option out there. And if other people have thoughts about that in relation to then being subdued and maligned and debilitated by 5G and other forms of electro invasions. And that relates to my third question about digital technology and our children, and our own bodies, what I call petroleum parenting, these habits, habituated obedience that parents fall into. How old is your child, or are your children?
My children are 20 and 17.
And 17. Okay, so not necessarily in the torments of video game technology, for example. I have an 11-year-old son who is in that that struggle. But if you have any thoughts about child rearing in the midst of these interlocking hegemonies.
Word. Yeah, I love being a parent. Is the greatest blessing of my life. Nashima and Emmett are Nashima, breath of life, Emmett's truth, are a blessing with all capital letters. And they were raised here on the farm. And so they're regular kids who can get down with modern life. And they also have like deep reverence and connection for the earth. They know how to build a house. They know how to grow food, how to facilitate a program, cook for a crowd, graciously host thousands of visitors in their home every year. And there's no substitute for direct experience. We only love what we know. And so that immersion in earth and immersion in community, immersion in spirit, the constancy of it, the regularity of it, I think is what overcomes sort of the powers of Babylon, so to speak, that would distract our children and tempt them with the golden calf. So I think that connection to earth and community and service as a daily part of life is really important. And yeah, and much compassion to parents, because there's a lot of pressure on the outside coming in. I remember them being like, can I get an iPhone? They're like 10. No.
Matt, did you resist?
Beautiful.
As long as we're practical. At some point there's safety considerations, right? Yeah.
My last question is about Sephardic folklore in relation to, I was just in Benin with my 11-year-old son, living in a Vudan community. And one of the reasons we were there is to look at the relationship between Vudan and Sephardic folklore. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, cool. I mean, I don't know a lot. My spouse is Sephardic, and my maternal ancestors are from, Vodun lands, and I'm a member of clergy in Vodun. I do know from studying Vodun in Ghana, West Africa, there's a ton of Hebrewisms there, and there are stories told about ancestry in Egypt and like never getting to go free and crossing the sea and staying in Egypt and then migrating west through what is present day Nigeria to Ghana, but holding on to some of these ancient practices. So there's a huge amount of lore around that. But I was living in communities that observed the Sabbath, observed circumcision, place gravestones after a year. And I was like, what is happening? So there's a little bit of scholarship around it. I have a couple of books about it, but haven't dived in too deep. But I think the intersections are certainly there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you both. Todd? Yeah.
Hi, Leah. Super
Hi.
inspiring. And just, it evoked so many heartstrings, so much courage in the belly, and so many parallels to my own feeble attempts at doing things. And I'm asking you essentially on a practical organizing level, some questions. I tend to be wanting to implement ideas, and I just see you doing the demonstration project, child raising, community education, reframing narratives, organizing nationally, writing. Like, you have so many different irons in the fire, as I think I do too. To me, the context in which you laid, it is a bleak future, and I see hope arising from you also. I'm wondering what kind of actions give you the most juice looking at the decades ahead, if you can speak to that in terms of do you see yourself putting your time equally into all of these things? What do you think is perhaps the most critical in terms of giving advice to those of us who are aspiring to move forward in the decades ahead?
That's a great question. There's like three parts in there. So one, the audacity of hope kind of part, even if we won't win, which I think we might, we're going to have a lot better world in the meantime if we act like we will. If we have a bunch of despairing, self-centered people going around just trying to get theirs before Armageddon, right? We're going to be in pretty bad shape. So, even if all I do is feed this family today and I can't fix the food system, like, we're both better off, so I think that's a little bit about the hope piece, even in the faith. As far as the what to do, so Black Earth Wisdom is the why. My previous book, Farming While Black, is the how. It's like super practical with all the steps and all the things. And there's the last chapter of that is specifically about addressing racial injustice. So I'll mention that broad brush, and we have free excerpts on our website. So if you don't want to buy it, that's fine. But I think that there's not like one right way we're going to solve things. Social change. We model it using the transformative butterfly of social change. So there's 4 winglets on the butterfly. Butterfly needs all 4 to fly. One of them is reform, that's working inside the system to make incremental change. One is resist, that's the blockades and protests and going up against oppression. There's the building wing, which is creating alternative institutions that model the world we want to see. I mostly hang out on that wing. And then there's the healer's wing. That's the prayer and the therapy and the art and music we need to make it through to the other side. And so I always tell people, like, it's the intersection of what the world needs and what makes you come alive, you know, and you can go on our website to our action guide. There's like 200 things to do. You know, for me personally, I love to farm and I love to tell stories. And so I can do other things and I do them when needed, but you know, that's the lane I kind of come back to, not because it's more important than any other lane, but it is the intersection of what the world needs and what gifts Creator gave me to offer. And so that's where I'm going to make the best contribution. If that makes sense.
Beautiful. I guess I'd like to fine tune my question in that I also find I'm a minister for watershed discipleship. And I've joined the Mennonites as an adult, but Ched Myers and Watershed Discipleship and Baba Dayum and Jonathan McCrae, etc. I've found that for me, a faith of a spirit is so vital within so many places that tend to be empirical, academic, or secular. Do you have a sense? It seems to me that you have decided in your heart, whether you can or can't stop it, that soul is needed as well. Do you have a response, I guess, in a largely secular climate, how important it is for you to keep operating out of soul and spirit?
I mean, it's not optional. I mean, I'm a double PK. Both my parents are preachers. I was raised, it's in me through and through. I was inventing nature religion from age 5. So it's like not actually optional. But one of the reasons I wrote Black Earth Wisdom is because, you know, farming while Black, like I said, is the how-to. So if you want to learn how to make great compost or plant carrots or run a youth program, it's there step by step, which is great. But if we want to transform society, there's an underlying value shift that's needed. And I really do think that that's ethical and cosmological. Like you can keep squirreling your way around to oppression until you really understand that, like, you and I are kin and me and that tree are kin. And it's not cool to oppress and exploit. It's actually not about a profit motive. And as long as we're sort of dancing around it, trying to like value ecosystem services within a capitalist framework, like we haven't done the underlying value shift that's actually going to create enduring change. So, and again, I'm all for incremental change. Like, I'm really glad that Southern planters were forced to end chattel slavery, even though they hadn't changed their values. Like, there's a place for that. But over generations, there has been a value shift, right? I would hope that 95% of people are like actually against chattel slavery in their hearts at this point, but that wasn't the case in 1865. But the long-term enduring change is a values change, and that's a spiritual change. So that's why I have at least part of myself in that lane.
And so that duology, the first farming while Black being more practical and manual, and Black Earth Wisdom being much more on that spiritual and philosophical framework. Yeah,
to oversimplify, but yeah, basically.
Yeah, right.
They both have a little of both, but
yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you both. Just before Thea, before I let you go, I just want to ask, will one of the two Leahs maybe give us a source for the butterfly wing model, which I love. That I just found that really useful, heuristic, a useful kind of tool. So thanks. Thea, go ahead if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, I hope.
You are. Thank you so much. Yeah, hi. This was a wonderful presentation. I'm a writer and I think a lot about consciousness and introspection. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about how introspection is influencing this separation from nature. And if that's too confusing a question, then there's a connection between empathy and consciousness. So I was wondering, with your vast experience with cultural differences, do you see cultural differences in empathy, and perhaps empathy is missing when dealing with nature?
Yeah. Again, I want you to say what you think. Go ahead and say it. I think you have the answer to your own question.
I absolutely don't.
Introspection. So in the Yoruba religion, which is one of the religions where I practice as clergy, there's a concept of Ori, which is the closest thing to kind of an Eastern introspection. So the Ori is the divinity inside of you. Everyone has a little spark of the divine, and that's what connects us spiritually and ethically to all beings. And the way that you cultivate your connection to your Ori, which is really your intuition, your sixth sense, your moral compass, is through stillness. So the sort of and what I'm getting at is the sort of the mindfulness practice, which is called cool-headedness. You literally put water or coconut water on your head to cool and calm your head so that you can be quiet enough to actually hear God from inside of you talking and resonating the voices of all the other little gods inside of all beings, right? And so I think there, certainly in my practice and my understanding, that this sort of place of quietude, which I talked a bit about in the Black Earth Wisdom lecture, the stillness, the silence, the pause between noise, is when you hear the necessary voices. And yeah, of course we lack empathy. I mean, again, I think that's really similar to what I was saying around the relegating others to non-kin, to non-person, to non-family, allows us to turn off what I hope is a natural human impulse of empathy. Because if you look at a frog and you say, well, you're not anything I recognize, I don't have to extend that to you. Or you look at a person of a different color or language and you say, well, I don't recognize you as being, the empathy shuts off and then the horrors begin. So I do agree with you around needing to relearn, revive a practice of empathy across difference.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I have a question, if I may, which will take us to the matter of Sabbath. And I'm curious on two levels. One, I'm curious, if you want to share, if you're willing to share, do you have a Sabbath practice? What does it look like? Is it, do you see it as an essential part of your life of farming, of the multidimensional path that you are walking? And to me, on a more general level, I mean, Sabbath is a great example of, a boundary setting and taking a time of rest. And like you said, there are different ways that can manifest. One is to say, well, this forest, we don't hunt in it. So it's a physical, it's a spatial thing. And another is a temporal thing, on this day of the week or this day of the month or whatever, we opt not to do X, Y, Z. So just love to hear you talk more about that.
So I love the Sabbath. I would say I'm an aspirant more than a devotee, but almost every Sabbath, we don't work and we dedicate ourselves to prayer and usually some outdoor activity, hiking or paddling around. And our rabbi at Beret Shalom is wonderful. She's like, even if you can observe the Sabbath for the length of time it takes for your Shabbat candles to burn down, like start there, and so sometimes that's what it is because life is hectic and we're still very much in a societal context, but we at least that length of time and often more and improving over time. The other thing is we practice Shemitah. So we practice the 7 and 49 year cycles of Shemitah and Jubilee on our farm. And, we do it in creative ways. In 2015, which was the 2 Shemitahs ago, we actually shut down almost the entire farm and we did a whole internal reorganization of the organization. This past Shemitah, we're a little off. We only rested part of the farm, but I'm actually taking a sabbatical this year. I'm taking 6 months away for the first time ever. And there's a lot to say about that. I'm going to be devoted to listening to the earth for 6 months and coming back ready for the second half of my life in this project. So there is a way that we, we leave the corners and the gleanings, which is not answering Sabbath directly, but there are ways that we take some of those, Torah-based practices around how to be on land and how to rest, how to treat your fruit trees, that very much inform the way we farm here too.
Okay, amazing. I think they are all very much interconnected.
Yeah.
But great. Okay, and no pressure. This is not about shaming or pressuring. That all sounds just amazing, really amazing. Thanks for being willing to share that.
Oh, of course. No, it's one of the greatest ideas of the history of humankind, the Sabbath. And I always mention it at staff meetings. I was like, it's to thank the Jewish people for the weekend. It's like,
right. Yeah. Wanting time off is revolutionary, radical, and self-interest. Any other thoughts, questions from anyone?
Well, thank you. Some folks asked about, I'll drop it in the chat, but some folks asked about book tour and how to get involved. So I'll just mention our website is soulfirefarm.org. And if you look at the calendar on the website, it has all the upcoming events, including book tour events, opportunities to come volunteer on the farm or take a tour or take a class. So definitely check out soulfirefarm.org. And we also have a lot of guides on there around like what you can do or suggested reading. So if you're feeling jazzed on this topic, feel free to nerd out on our very informative website and reach out if you can't find anything.
Great. And do you have a apartment or room that people can stay at if they come visit and volunteer? Or
There are some nearby rentals that are in our community that we can recommend to folks. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I'm just curious, is your farm, do you have neighbors who are like-minded? Is there a kind of intentional community around you? How does that look?
Yeah, so we're in a working class, Republican leaning, rural upstate New York town. And Soul Fire Farm itself, including both folks living in worker housing and also co-op members, because we have a housing co-op. There's about 16 individuals in our community up here, like immediately on the land, and then some others close by. There's a wonderful Buddhist peace pagoda, Nipansa Miyahoji Pagoda under Junsan Yasuda. That's a mile down the road, and they're dear friends of ours, and we spend a lot of time at the pagoda as well, and them here.
Good. And,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
how are your relations with your Republican neighbors?
We
Mutual understanding and cooperation?
Yep. Yes, mutual understanding, cooperation, exactly.
Great. Yeah, I've actually been reading a lot of memoirs of back to the landers from the 60s and 70s. And one of the things that I was very surprised at, but is remarkable and makes sense, is how much these, urban escapees actually learned from their neighbors who probably were mostly Republican and mostly, rural folk. And they really shared a lot. They each shared their specific forms of wisdom with each other in a very beautiful way. And often the local rurals saved their asses when they couldn't survive winter because they didn't know what the hell they were doing, at least at first. Yeah. Well, listen, thank you. So wonderful. What a delight and honor to learn from you and to bask in your presence for a little bit. And I bless you that, I'm paraphrasing a little bit from a Talmudic blessing, but I bless you that all your fruits should be sweet and nourishing and healthy, and that your real fruits, your children, should grow up to be amazingly strong and powerful and magnificent and sharing and beneficial as their parents.
Amen. Thank you.
Which I'm
So
sure.
inspiring.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well,
Thank you very
everyone.
much.
Take
Thank
care.
you, Leah.
Shabbat shalom.
Wonderful.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Of course. Be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.